Hey guys, tonight we journey to a land where the sun blazes relentlessly, the sand stretches endlessly, and yet, somehow, people still found a way to make ice cream. Yes, really. We're in ancient Persia tonight, walking beside royal servants, past spice sellers and camel caravans, into the surprisingly frosty corners of one of the world's hottest civilizations. You'll hear the crunch of ice beneath sandals, smell rosewater in the dry air, and try not to melt into your sandals as the desert heat pushes you towards something cold, creamy, and improbably delicious. And sure, you might think you could survive a day in the Achaemenid Empire, but let's be honest, you probably wouldn't even make it past breakfast without demanding central air and a chilled latte. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing that. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the plateau of central Persia, the air heavy with heat and the breath of camels. It's the 5th century BCE. Give or take a dusty census. You're here not for conquest or glory, but because someone in a palace miles away has a craving. Not for wine, not for figs, for something cold. The elite of Persia, as it turns out, were among the first to decide that hot weather should not get in the way of frozen dessert. Historians still argue whether this was truly ice cream, in the way we understand it today, but most agree it was a chilled, creamy, flavored concoction, good enough to count. And even better if you were a king. This craving wasn't exactly convenient. You're standing in a land where summer temperatures regularly roast above 40 degrees Celsius. That's 104 degrees Fahrenheit for the Fahrenheit faithful. Where water evaporates faster than you can sip it. And yet, somewhere in the imperial kitchens of Persepolis, someone just rang a little bell and asked for dessert. Cold dessert. Imagine the logistical panic. Somewhere, a junior servant is wiping sweat off his forehead and nervously checking his map of snow storage locations. Somewhere else, an ox groans as crates of crushed ice are being loaded beside baskets of saffron and preserved rose petals. The thing is, Persians didn't wait for winter festivals or rare frosts. No, they built their craving into the calendar. Cold was seasonal, sure, but it was also something they stored, shipped, and even traded. You'll soon see just how deep that chilly rabbit hole goes. And in this heat, it was more than luxury. It was symbolism. Cold meant power. Cold meant knowledge. Cold meant you had the muscle and the money to bring mountain snow to desert table. As you shuffle forward, dust curling around your ankles, you spot the first dome on the horizon. Pale beige against an even paler sky. A yakshul, one of many. But you'll get to that in the next leg of our journey. For now, picture this, a royal banquet, long mats stretched under date palms, bronze bowls clinking, and at the very end of the table, served with theatrical ceremony, something frosty, fragrant, and flecked with flower petals. Quirky detail time, according to scattered reports, and a few suspiciously poetic inscriptions. Some Persians might have flavored their desserts with musk. Yes, musk. That stuff from glands. Apparently, nothing says summer treat like eating something that smells like medieval rich guy who skipped laundry day. But hey, rosewater makes up for a lot. Mainstream historians mostly agree the Achaemenid elite developed a refined taste for sweet, frozen dishes long before Europe had figured out that cream could go in anything other than butter. They had the flavor know-how, the infrastructure, and frankly, the drama to make it work. Oh, and here's your first reality check. If you were a commoner, you probably weren't getting any of this. Your dessert options involve dates and dreams. Maybe you'd sneak a lick of something if you worked in the palace kitchens and no one was looking. But the rest of the time? Heat stroke and barley porridge, baby. Still, knowledge of this chilly delight spread. The dream of ice cream drifted across ancient trade winds. Even the Greeks, who adored Persian pomp almost as much as they despised Persian politics, borrowed a few dessert ideas from their eastern neighbors. But more on that much later. Right now, you're parched. The kind of dry where even your dreams feel dehydrated. But there's hope on the horizon, a shadow of a dome, and the cool whisper of something buried deep beneath the sand. You're getting closer. You reach the base of it just after sunset, a towering dome of sun-baked mud brick rising out of the sand like some misplaced spaceship. It's silent, massive, cool to the touch. If you press your hand against it. This, my heat-weary traveler, is a yakshul, literally ice pit in Persian. And it's the ancient desert's answer to a very modern problem, refrigeration. Let's take a slow walk around it first. You notice its sides slope smoothly, conical in shape, like an upside-down funnel. The outer shell is made of a thick, chalky compound, sand, clay, egg whites, and goat hair, stirred together by someone who, let's be honest, probably didn't expect their work to be admired 2,000 years later by sleepy podcast listeners. But they knew what they were doing. This ancient plaster is water-resistant and heat-reflecting, nature's air conditioner. Step carefully now. There's a small entrance, barely tall enough for a grown man to walk through without ducking. You slip into the cool dark, and it's at least 15 degrees cooler in here. And quiet, almost sacred. You take a deep breath. Smells like dust, stone, and maybe the ghost of some long-lost pomegranate sherbet. Inside the yakshul, the floor drops away into a deep subterranean chamber. This is where the ice was kept, layered carefully with straw or insulating ash, like prehistoric Tupperware. It wasn't just random blocks of ice. No, this was curated cold. Some yakshuls stored snow collected in winter from nearby mountains. Others used clever systems to freeze water overnight using shallow, shaded pools outside. And here's the genius. Persian engineers understood that hot air rises. The tall dome vented heat up and out, while thick walls and clever subterranean architecture kept the chill trapped inside. Some of these structures could preserve ice for months, even deep into the brutal summer. Historians still argue whether this system was a Persian invention or a refinement of even older Mesopotamian cooling practices. But one thing's certain. The Achaemenids turned it into high art. These weren't crude pits. They were meticulously engineered microclimates. Passive refrigeration centuries before electricity. And let's talk fringe trivia, because you deserve it. Some yakshuls, according to regional folklore, weren't just storage spaces but also meeting spots for the cool elite. Yes, I said it. Local nobles and priests would occasionally descend into these cool chambers to discuss business, or just escape the inferno for a while under the pretense of checking the quality of the ice. Think of it as a Bronze Age wine cellar, but stickier. Now pause for a moment. Run your fingers along the packed straw lining the wall. Above you, a shaft of moonlight glows faintly through a vent near the peak of the dome. The air feels like early spring. You could fall asleep here, except someone's calling you outside. You step back into the dusky light. A small team of laborers is lining up. They're packing large ice blocks into canvas bundles. Camels grunt and shift. A young boy is counting bundles and muttering prayers to ensure the ice survives the long road. One man slips a chunk into a nearby ceramic jug and seals it tight. Royal delivery. Someone miles away needs that for dessert. What's remarkable isn't just the survival of this practice, but how widespread it became. Archaeologists have uncovered yakshuls across Iran, particularly near Yazd and Kerman. These weren't one-off experiments. They were part of a vast, organized infrastructure. And here's a curious note. Some of these structures still stand today. Locals might use them for other storage purposes now, but walk past one on a hot summer day, and you'll feel the ghost of that old chill at your ankles. A whisper of ancient refrigeration. Of course, not every ice pit had a happy ending. Some collapsed, some were plundered, others just fell out of use when more modern cooling technologies crept in. But for centuries, they were the quiet heroes of Persian comfort. And now you know, the next time your freezer makes that grumbling noise at 3 a.m., remember this mud brick dome standing stoic in the desert, keeping things frosty while the sun tried its best to ruin everything. You move on now, leaving the yakshul behind. The sky above you is black velvet scattered with stars. You hear bells jingling in the distance. That, my friend, is the sound of the next story. A cold cargo is coming, carried down from the mountains, one snowflake at a time. The bells get louder as you follow a narrow trail toward the foot of the mountains. The heat of the lowlands has eased, replaced by a dry, pine-scented chill. Ahead of you is a caravan, not of spices or silk this time, but of ice. Real, actual ice, loaded on the backs of increasingly annoyed camels, wrapped in layers of felt and straw like extremely fragile burritos. This, believe it or not, is a regular sight during winter and spring in parts of ancient Persia. You wouldn't think snow and camels went together, but here you are, watching a line of shaggy beasts descend through switchbacks with chunks of frozen mountain nestled between sacks of straw. It's the slowest, least aerodynamic way to chill dessert, but it worked. Persian ice transport was a seasonal affair. Winter snow was gathered from higher elevations, often from the Zagros Mountains or the Alborz Range near what's now Tehran. Once collected, it was packed tight, insulated, and sent on a lumbering, careful journey down into the heart of the empire. Where exactly it was going depended on who was asking. If it was a noble's estate, it might be for a garden party. If it was the king, well, you'd better not be late. Or melty. Historians still argue whether the ice was always harvested naturally or if more organized ice-making methods existed in certain altitudes. Some records suggest shallow outdoor pools were used overnight during winter months to freeze thin layers of water, which were scraped up daily and stored. Others say natural glaciers were the only reliable source. Either way, the logistics were intense. Roads had to be cleared, storage prepared, and the route timed just right so the cargo didn't turn into an expensive puddle halfway through the desert. And remember, this is long before the cool luxury of refrigerated transport. You had to rely on shadows, cool cloths, early departures, and a lot of crossed fingers. You pause beside the led camel. Its handler gives you a tired nod. He's wrapped in a thick wool shawl and chewing a stalk of something that probably tasted better several hours ago. Cold enough for kings, he mutters, patting a carefully bundled crate. The ice inside has likely already begun to soften. Every hour counts. One quirky but delightful detail: some elite households commission special ice deliveries timed with weddings, coronations, or religious ceremonies. Imagine the drama, guests fanning themselves in the Persian heat, when suddenly a servant enters with a silver bowl of frosted pomegranate. It's like the ancient version of bringing out the birthday cake with sparklers. It wasn't all just vanity, either. Cold water and ice were considered restorative. Chilled milk, when available, was offered to the sick or elderly. During Nowruz, the Persian New Year, having ice water was a sign of prosperity and renewal, especially in the hotter southern regions. But let's be clear, unless you were at the top of the food chain, you weren't getting any of this. Ice was expensive. Each block that made it down from the mountains came with the silent cost of labor, loss, and, honestly, probably a couple of missing fingers from careless handling. There's also evidence of military use. Certain records, some more folklore than fact, suggest that commanders in northern provinces kept ice reserves for wounded soldiers or for mixing herbal cooling tonics. Historians still debate whether this was widespread practice or just one of those stories told to impress dinner guests. As the caravan moves past you, you notice a girl riding side saddle on a donkey, humming to herself. She's holding a wrapped parcel in her lap, probably a smaller delivery for a merchant's family. There's something sweet about it. You imagine her arriving home, presenting it proudly to her mother, and everyone crowding around to press their fingers to the cool surface. No one eats it yet. Just the sensation alone is a gift. Further back in the train, one camel shifts too hard and knocks a crate against a rock. A sharp crack. Someone curses softly. Damage like that could ruin a whole bundle. You get the sense that transporting snow through the desert might be one of the earliest stress-inducing jobs in recorded history. You continue walking alongside them as the sun begins to rise. The snow cargo glows pink in the dawn light, beads of water gathering along its felt wrappings. You run your fingers over the outside of one crate. It's already damp. Time is ticking. Before you part ways with the caravan, take one last look back up the slope. Tiny figures are still scraping snow into baskets, wrapping it like treasure, and handing it off to the next camel. This endless, improbable journey of frozen luxury was repeated countless times across centuries. And now, you know how it started. How a craving for cold in a place of heat sparked an entire frozen supply chain operated by tired hands and dreaming cooks, where every snowflake counted. You leave them behind now. The bells fading once again. Ahead lies the palace. Someone's about to receive their chilly reward. The road smooths beneath your feet as you approach the outer edges of the city, Persepolis, gleaming in the dry morning light like a mirage made permanent. This is no ordinary city. You can feel it in the rhythm of footsteps, the heavy silks swaying in the breeze, the low murmur of servants preparing for another banquet in the halls of the mighty Achaemenid Empire. And somewhere inside those gilded chambers, someone is waiting for ice cream. You slip past vendors selling fresh herbs, grilled lamb skewers, dried figs. The air smells both sweet and smoky, like every meal comes with a hint of incense. But follow the line of uniformed servants. They're carrying trays, gold, bronze, carved wood, all headed in the same direction, the Great Hall. It's not just any meal. This is a royal banquet. The Great Hall is vast, shaded by towering stone columns shaped like animals, bulls, lions, griffins, all staring down at you with regal boredom. You're surrounded by rustling robes, clinking goblets, a chorus of languages. Dignitaries from Babylon, Egypt, Lydia. Trade, politics, alliances, all being digested alongside generous servings of pomegranate wine. And then, dessert. A gong sounds. Heads turn. A hush settles. Not dramatic, more reverent. Here it comes. Two servants glide in with a large bronze bowl, rimmed with decorative inlays and kept cool with damp cloth. Inside, a slushy, fragrant mix of shaved ice, rosewater, honey, and saffron. This is the good stuff. Persian ice cream, faluda, wasn't creamy like the modern Western kind. It was delicate, icy, infused with floral water, and often laced with thin rice noodles that glistened like translucent threads. You'd think noodles in a frozen dessert would be strange. And you'd be right. But the texture? Surprisingly satisfying. A little chewy, a little crunchy, a whole lot of refreshing. Historians still argue whether this early form of faluda had the same preparation methods as the versions we know today. Some suggest the sweetened ice was layered with vermicelli. Others believe early iterations were more like slushes or snow cones soaked in syrups. Regardless, it was exotic, complex, and impossibly cold. The king receives his serving first. It's not spooned out like a peasant's porridge. No, it's sculpted. Someone probably spent an hour arranging crushed pistachios on top. You imagine a servant nervously checking that the rosewater concentration is just right. Too much, and the royal palate might be offended. Too little, and the entire dessert risks mediocrity, a fate worse than exile, surely. What's amusing is that this very elaborate bowl of flavored ice might have been seen, even then, as a fleeting luxury. You couldn't store it long. You couldn't ship it overseas without disaster. It was ephemeral, meant to be savored now. A very expensive way to chase a few minutes of cool comfort. One servant at the edge of the hall fans the bowl constantly, keeping the ambient heat at bay. Another stands with a napkin to gently wipe away any condensation threatening to drip. Honestly, it's a performance. But when you're royalty in the desert, eating chilled noodles infused with saffron and rosewater, what isn't a performance? Let's sprinkle in a delightful tidbit. Persian poets sometimes reference frozen desserts in their odes to love. Her breath was cooler than mountain snow, steeped in jasmine. Romantic? Maybe, but also a subtle flex. My love is like rare dessert. Might be history's most underrated pickup line. But back to you. You're lingering by the musicians. Try not to draw attention to the fact that you're a bit underdressed and not on the guest list. Still, you catch a whiff of that icy blend, spicy, floral, and just cold enough to make your teeth ache if you eat too fast. And here's where the magic kicks in. Cold desserts weren't just indulgence. In ancient Persian philosophy, rooted in Zoroastrian principles of balance between hot and cold, sweet and sour. Ice played a symbolic role. Cooling one's body wasn't just about temperature. It was about harmony. Eating frozen treats could be seen as restoring inner equilibrium, especially after a feast of grilled meats and hearty grains. You spot a priest in the corner murmuring a blessing over his dish. Nearby, two noble women giggle behind their veils as a chunk of snow slips from a cup and splashes rose syrup across the carpet. Somewhere, someone's writing a complaint scroll to housekeeping. And just like that, the moment is over. The bowl is empty. The servers glide away, the cloths now damp and warm. You hear quiet sighs, that strange joy of a treat finished too quickly. But don't worry, there's more to come. The real secret? This palace isn't the only place where frozen dreams are made. Across the empire, people are adapting, innovating, finding new ways to chill under impossible suns. And your next stop? A market where even the gods expect dessert. You step out from the palace's cool shadows into the brighter, noisier pulse of a city bazaar. Here, the air buzzes with bartering, music, and the sizzling of meat over open flames. You're surrounded by baskets of spices, jars of pickled lemons, carts stacked high with apricots and figs, and just beyond them, a modest stall with no shouting vendor. Just a faint stream of vapor rising from a wide clay bowl. You drift closer, drawn not by scent, but by a kind of curiosity that makes your skin tingle. The woman behind the stall is old, wrapped in indigo linen, with silver rings on each finger. She doesn't greet you, just gestures toward the bowl. Inside is something pale, almost snow-like. You lean in. The scent is heady, rosewater, orange blossom, a hint of mint. This is what everyday people call faluda, a simpler cousin to the royal dessert. Crushed ice mixed with syrup, and always, those slippery threads of rice noodles. They're handmade, dried in coils, and boiled quickly before being stirred into the icy mix. If you're lucky, there's a splash of lime juice too. You take a bite. It crunches and melts at the same time. But everyone agrees on one thing. The flavors were regional signatures. In Shiraz, you'd find sour cherry syrup. In Yazd, it might be more citrus-forward. In some desert towns, they'd throw in a dash of cinnamon or even crushed dried rose petals for heat balance, though that sounds more poetic than medical. Let's not skip the strange stuff. In some markets, faluda was mixed with a bit of vinegar. Not much, just enough to give it a tangy twist. A few skeptical travelers wrote home to say it tasted like frozen salad dressing. But you find it oddly pleasant, even calming. You decide to finish the bowl. As you eat, you notice something subtle. Everyone here's got their own way of enjoying it. A merchant carefully folds the noodles before each spoonful. A young boy stirs his impatiently, turning it into syrupy slush. An old man drinks it straight from the bowl like cold tea. No one's in a hurry. It's the rare moment in a hot day when time slows just a little. And there's something deeply communal about it. No gilded platters here. No ceremoniales. Just cracked clay bowls, wooden spoons, and sticky fingers. It's the kind of treat you remember not just for the taste, but for the temperature, for the fact that it worked. You overhear a woman telling a story to a curious child, that once a king asked for the coldest food in the world, and his cook ran to the mountains, returned in 2 weeks, and served him faluda. The child gasps, skeptical. 2 weeks for a snack. The woman shrugs. The king said it was worth it. There's truth in the tale, even if the timeline's questionable. These frozen desserts weren't everyday fare, even for market-goers. They required planning, cooling pits, access to stored snow, or early morning ice from shallow pans that froze overnight. But people made it work. Because when you live in a place where summer feels like punishment, finding joy in something cold is almost an act of resistance. By now your bowl is empty, and your fingers are wet from condensation. You give a small nod of thanks to the vendor, who doesn't smile, but offers you a second spoonful anyway on the house. You take it, not because you're still hungry, but because it feels like a moment you'll want to remember clearly in a dream. And as you leave the stall, the flavors lingering on your tongue, you realize something. Ice cream here isn't just about taste. It's about contrast. Cool against hot. Soft against stone. sweet against salt, and sometimes noodles against expectation. You wander deeper into the market now, following the fluttering flags of traders from distant cities. You're about to learn how frozen desserts weren't just local pride, but became part of something much, much bigger. The alley narrows as you follow a trail of music and the warm scent of goat's milk simmering over coals. Lanterns sway above you, strung between buildings like sleepy stars caught on ropes. You've wandered into the festival district. Tonight's celebration is for Turgan, the midsummer water festival celebrated by Zoroastrians with songs, dancing, and, oddly enough, frozen milk. You're swept into a slow-moving crowd draped in linen and gold-threaded tunics. Children run between legs, tossing water from leather pouches. You flinch, but the splash hits a bearded man in front of you, who just laughs and wipes his beard with a grin. Apparently, surprise soaking is part of the fun. This festival is one of many seasonal observances in Zoroastrian culture, and it's deeply tied to balance. Fire and water, warm and cold, joy and restraint. And here, nestled between fire dancers and chanting priests, is a makeshift stall where someone is stirring something thick and white in a wide copper bowl packed with crushed snow. A young woman offers you a cup, her bracelets jingling. It's cold goat's milk, lightly sweetened and perfumed with crushed cardamom and honey. The texture is like thin yogurt. You sip. It's odd, but refreshing, somewhere between a dessert and a prayer. Historians still argue whether frozen milk drinks like this were merely chilled or partially frozen, technically a slushy. Not quite a solid dessert, but either way, they held ritual significance. Milk, especially goat's or sheep's milk, was considered sacred. Cooling it added another layer of reverence. Some priests even anointed statues with it during summer solstice rites. You sit by a shallow pool under a fig tree, surrounded by quiet conversations. Somewhere nearby, a flute plays softly. The cup in your hand begins to sweat, and you wonder how long they had to stir it to keep it from separating in the heat. One fringe practice you overhear involves freezing yogurt to preserve it for long journeys. It's wrapped in linen, buried with salt and straw, and rehydrated with rosewater at the destination. It's unclear whether this was widespread or a regional oddity, but some travelers swore it was like eating snow that remembered a sheep. Elsewhere in the festival, a larger bowl of ice milk mixture is reserved for ceremonial purposes. An elder circles it 3 times before stirring in crushed dried mint and laying a single pomegranate seed on top. The symbolism is opaque but beautiful. When asked, he simply says, "It cools what the sun burns." You smile. That's the kind of explanation you came for. Nearby, a troupe of performers begins a play about the archer Arash and his legendary arrow that defined the Persian border. It's a tale of sacrifice and precision, mirrored in how carefully the festival cooks prepare the chilled dishes. There's no tossing ingredients casually. Everything is measured, sacred. Even a dash of sugar can tip the balance. Here's the thing. Zoroastrianism emphasized moderation in all things. Even sweetness. Even cold. Frozen treats weren't for everyday indulgence, but for moments that called for reflection or honor. To eat something icy on a holy day wasn't just comfort, it was communion. A boy beside you taps your shoulder and offers you a small clay bowl of saffron-scented snow. No noodles this time, just syrup steeped with orange peel. You accept, knowing it's probably his only portion. He doesn't wait for thanks. He just runs off, laughing, sandals slapping against stone. You let the snow melt slowly on your tongue. And it hits you. This isn't just food. It's celebration, connection, a shared rebellion against heat and hardship. It's the human instinct to cool down the world, one spoonful at a time. As the sun dips below the rooftops and the water games wind down, you hear the priests begin a slow chant. Fire flickers on the altar. People gather close, and someone places a bowl of chilled rosewater at its base. You watch as the vapors rise and vanish into the dusk. Some say these offerings were symbolic acts to appease the spirits of heat and drought. Others believe they were simply gifts to the divine, tokens of thanks for surviving another year under the blazing Persian sun. You rise, quietly, and leave the courtyard behind. Your skin smells faintly of cardamom and smoke. The memory of cool milk lingers on your breath. Tonight, you've seen how ice becomes ritual and how something as simple as a frozen treat can mark the sacred edge of a desert summer. Tomorrow, you'll meet the people who made it all possible. By the time you reach the edge of the city again, dawn is just beginning to turn the sky from charcoal to soft gold. The streets are quieter now, swept clean after last night's festival, but in a dusty square behind a row of merchant houses, you hear the clatter of wooden carts and the unmistakable thump of heavy lifting. You're in the workyard now, where the real cold economy lives. No silk robes, no poetic metaphors. Just sun-hardened hands, rope burns, sweat-streaked tunics, and the quiet rhythm of labor. You watch as a block of ice, maybe the size of a sleeping goat, is hoisted onto a small sled. A boy with calloused palms smooths a straw mat over it before another worker begins lashing it down with strips of dampened leather. This is the underbelly of desert. The Persian cold chain, though no one called it that, was an informal but essential network. It included snow gatherers in the mountains, ice haulers on the caravan routes, dome packers in the yakshals, vendors in the markets, and the occasional very lucky servant in a royal kitchen. Each role mattered, and each role came with its own strange little details. Let's meet a few of them, shall we? First up, the ice cutters. These men hiked high into snowy regions with flat bronze scrapers, baskets, and no shortage of injuries. Historians still argue whether they were free tradesmen or bonded workers, but most agree they had seasonal employment and were paid in a mix of grain and coin. Some used hardened wooden shovels reinforced with leather and packed their snow into enormous wicker barrels lined with palm bark to keep the outer layers from melting. Then there were the dome packers, those who actually arranged the ice inside the yakshals. This wasn't just tossing snow into a pit and hoping for the best. No, it involved layers of snow, insulation, tamping, draining, and vent checking. A poorly packed dome could sweat itself into useless mush by mid-spring. Some domes even had clay pipes leading to lower drainage pits to siphon off meltwater, a sort of ancient drip management system. And every one of these laborers had a common enemy: sunlight. Even a short exposure to direct desert light could undo hours of hauling. So most workers started before sunrise or moved under cloth canopies stretched between buildings like droopy sails. And even then, it wasn't uncommon for half a block of ice to vanish before it ever reached its final destination. Now, here's the truly delightful bureaucratic twist: there were taxes on ice. Yes, even 2,500 years ago, the government knew how to monetize comfort. In some regions, delivery of stored ice was regulated, and wealthier citizens were taxed proportionally on their ice consumption. Frozen indulgence wasn't just rare, it was auditable. One document fragment, now debated by historians, includes what appears to be a snow inventory. It lists quantities, delivery routes, dates, and, a charming detail, minor damages sustained during sandstorm interference. Apparently, even then, Mother Nature had opinions about your dessert plans. You sit beside a low wall and listen as two workers argue gently over how to split the morning's delivery. One swears a certain merchant shorted them on payment last week. The other says not to make trouble. It's too hot for trouble. Their hands never stop moving, wrapping bundles of ice in thick felt, packing them into clay-lined chests. Meanwhile, a young girl arrives with a wooden slate. She's today's ice ledger keeper. She scratches symbols into the wax with a bronze stylus, occasionally tapping one of the men on the shoulder to confirm a number. The men groan but comply. She's maybe 10, but her math is fierce and her authority absolute. And then there's the mystery job, an elderly man who just walks between domes, whispering to himself and tapping the walls with a stick. He listens to the sound, feels the vibrations. Nobody questions it. They just say he knows when a dome needs rebalancing. Historians haven't verified this role, but local lore calls him an ice listener. It's not glamorous work, but it's essential. These people keep the wheels of frozen luxury turning. Of course, there's a darker side to all of it. Long hours, heat stroke, back injuries. Some seasonal workers never return from the mountains. Others succumb to infections from long exposure to cold water in desert heat, a contradiction that their bodies simply couldn't handle. Coal was precious, but it came with real cost. And yet, despite all of that, the cold kept moving. The chain never broke. Through bureaucracy, labor, and just enough luck, frozen desserts arrived at their destination, sometimes melted, sometimes miraculous. You rise from your spot and nod to the workers as they begin their final bundle. The sun's up now, and already the air has a sleepy shimmer. You're sweating, but the memory of the cool dome and that chilled rosewater lingers in your mind like a secret. Next, you'll see how this frozen web spread outward, across empires and deserts, into cities you've only dreamed of. But for now, remember, somewhere beneath the desert, a block of snow is sleeping. Thanks to hands like these, you leave the workers behind as the city thins out, heading toward the caravanserai at the edge of the Imperial Road. The sky has turned that strange, blank blue that only deserts seem to know, a color that hums with heat. But you're not here for sand and sun today. You're here to watch the frost migrate. Because Persia didn't just invent frozen dessert, it exported it. The idea of flavored ice, chilled milk, or even frozen fruit pulp spread along the same arteries that carried cinnamon from Ceylon, indigo from India, and papyrus from the Nile. Persian cold culture hitched a ride on the backs of camels, donkeys, and dreams. You pass a caravan loading up now, spices from India, lapis from Afghanistan, and tucked gently into an elaborate chest packed with snow and linen, several small clay pots sealed with wax. They're filled with concentrated syrups, pomegranate, sour cherry, mulberry, and orange blossom. The ice won't survive the trip, but the idea will. In Babylon, such syrups were poured over local snow harvested during the city's short, frosty winters. In Anatolia, vendors began experimenting with goat's milk ices, combining Persian flavors with Turkish yogurts. In Egypt, nobles in Alexandria began storing imported snow from Mount Lebanon to mimic what they'd heard Persian kings enjoyed daily. Historians still argue whether these regional frozen treats were direct imitations or inspired evolutions. But what's clear is this. By the time of the later Achaemenid kings and into the Seleucid period, cold dessert had become cultural currency, a mark of sophistication, a quiet nod that you, too, were part of something refined. Here's a quirky note. Some satraps, Persian governors in distant provinces, were known to keep ice domes or mountain storage pits of their own, as a way to impress imperial inspectors or visiting dignitaries. One anecdote, passed down in regional folklore, tells of a satrap in Bactria who ordered a miniature yachtshell built in the courtyard of his villa, not for ice, but to show off his knowledge of courtly customs. It was never stocked, just admired. You pause beside a mapmaker sketching out major trade routes. His hand is steady, even as a child tugs at his robe for dates. His map shows the silk routes and the royal road, the lifeblood of Persian trade. And if you were to look closer, not on the parchment, but in the cargo lists, they include things like rose syrup, saffron extract, and even flat copper bowls ideal for mixing slush drinks. The supplies of dessert, tucked subtly among the empire's great goods. Somewhere nearby, a Greek merchant is making notes. He'll carry this story back to Ionia, where tales of Persian ice with noodles will confuse and delight the curious. Eventually, the Romans will hear of it too, though they'll add their usual flair. Crushed snow with honey and wine, served to senators who've never broken a sweat in their lives. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back here, at the caravanserai, it's all bustle and barter. You spot a man from Sogdiana, the ancient region that straddles modern Uzbekistan, showing off a glazed ceramic cup. He says it's designed to keep liquids cooler longer. He learned the technique from Persian travelers, he says. You nod, not because you're convinced, but because the effort is charming. Another merchant nearby displays small slabs of tamarind stone tablets. Supposedly, when dissolved in snow melt, they produce a bitter but invigorating chilled tonic. excellent for digestion. He swears. You imagine ancient Persian nobles sipping it after gorging on roast duck and grape jelly. You stroll through the stalls, catching snippets of languages you half recognize. Everyone here seems to know someone who's heard of Faluda or Persian ice. Some say it came from Ecbatana. Others insist it's only ever been made in Shiraz. There's no consensus, but there's fascination. A surprising number of travelers seem to believe there's magic involved. One insists the Persians have a salt priest who blesses the snow so it won't melt. Another swears there's a spell whispered into the dessert itself, binding cold to sweetness. These are, of course, embellishments, but who can blame them? It does feel like magic, doesn't it? One Roman visitor, recorded in much later texts, wrote that the Persian love for cold treats in hot climates was unnatural but admirable. He tried faluda, spat it out, then ordered seconds. As you do, as the sun begins to lower and the caravan prepares to depart, you stand back and watch. The camels are loaded. The carts creak forward. Packed among the silks and scrolls are the seeds of an idea. That ice could be a luxury, a medicine, a celebration. And behind it all is Persia, the empire that believed comfort was worth carrying, even if it had to be wrapped in straw, hauled over mountains, and melted a little along the way. Next, we'll return to the heart of it all, to the kitchens where these ideas came to life, with sticky fingers and cold clay bowls. But for now, let the wheels turn. Let the bells jingle faintly as the desert begins to cool. Evening again. The wind has changed, and with it, the scent of smoke and syrup leads you back into the city's beating heart, to the kitchens. Not the grand, ceremonial banquet halls, but the working, sweating, bustling world behind the scenes. The place where cold desserts are more than courtly ornaments. They're an art form. You duck beneath a low arch and enter a long corridor, humming with the sounds of clinking bowls. The rhythmic chop-chop of herbs, the occasional panic shout when something boils over. And at the far end of it all, a cool chamber lined with thick clay walls and padded shutters. This is the ice room. It's not much to look at, just a few low tables, some linen-wrapped jars, a basin of shallow water, and a pair of teenage boys sitting cross-legged, grating ice into a pile that looks suspiciously like snow. Their sleeves are rolled up, and they hum a quiet tune between tasks, occasionally flicking bits of ice at each other when the supervisor isn't looking. Here is where the frozen magic actually happens. One of them gestures for you to sit, then spoons a bit of the mixture into a small bowl. Crushed ice, grape syrup, a twist of orange peel, and, surprisingly, a sprinkle of salt. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs, brings out the sweetness. This isn't faluda exactly. This is experimentation. Because Persian kitchens, especially those attached to royal courts, were laboratories. Chefs were artists, pharmacists, and half-mystics. They worked from memory, tradition, and intuition. Recipes weren't written down. They were whispered, demonstrated, guarded. Some mixtures were passed down only to favored apprentices. Others vanished entirely with their creator's last breath. Historians still argue whether the earliest frozen dishes were inspired by Chinese ice confections, or if Persia invented its own icy culture independently. Some claim an ancient Persian text describes snow mixed with honey and wild thyme. Others dismiss this as poetic license. The truth is probably somewhere in between, like all good recipes. What we do know is that Persian kitchens experimented constantly. They tried everything: goat's milk with rose oil, yogurt with dried apricot pulp, snow melted with lavender honey, even ice combined with crushed cucumber for what might be the earliest frozen savory dish in history. Yes, frozen cucumber soup. You're allowed to shudder. You're handed another bowl, this one clearer, more refined. It's lemon juice steeped with basil, frozen into slush, then scraped into fine flakes. It smells like someone just opened a citrus grove inside a spice shop. The flavor is bright and oddly calming. You take another spoonful, and another. Around you, the kitchen swells with quiet concentration. Each bowl is carefully checked for consistency. Some of the mixture is swirled and low, shallow pans that sit overnight in the coldest corners of the kitchen, slowly forming delicate crystals. Others are flash mixed with chilled spoons to mimic a more sorbet-like effect. And there are mistakes. One bowl clumps too much and is tossed. Another curdles. One apprentice mutters that he forgot to rinse the rice noodles, and now they're sticking together like wet string. His partner groans, but it's not anger, it's affection. Mistakes are part of the process. Quirky kitchen tradition. One of the cooks insists on singing to the snow as he grates it. Not loudly, just a gentle hum. Helps it stay sweet, he claims. No one argues with him. You get the feeling he's been here the longest. Then there's the spice keeper. She enters quietly, a bundle of jars in her arms, each labeled with neat symbols: cinnamon, ginger, turmeric, even crushed marigold. Some are used for color, others for fragrance. A few, apparently, to ward off bad luck in the mixture. She sprinkles 3 pinches of something into a bowl of crushed cherry ice, stirs, nods, and vanishes again. And here's something truly delightful: smoke. Some versions of cold dessert were briefly exposed to scented smoke, usually from burning myrtle, orange wood, or sandalwood. The ice was kept at a distance, so the smoke didn't melt it, but still imparted a soft, exotic aroma. Imagine spooning up frozen jasmine beneath the stars. That's the idea. There's even a rumor among the younger cooks that one dish, made with boiled almond milk, crushed date, and pine sap, was only prepared once a year during a moonless night, to honor a forgotten goddess of sweetness. Historians scoff, but you kind of want it to be true. By now, your third bowl has melted into a sticky puddle. You don't mind. It's enough to sit in this fragrant, chilly corner of the world and watch the past taste its way toward the future. The head cook finally enters, inspects the trays, nods approvingly, and says something about sending the lemon slush to the vizier's wife. Her stomach's acting up again. So yes, frozen desserts are also medicine now. Naturally, as you leave the kitchen, you glance back one last time. The apprentices are still at work, still laughing. The snow piles grow slowly. The bowls fill one by one. And next? Well, we're going beyond Persia's borders, into Greece, Rome, and the surprisingly cold corners of history where ice kept showing up in the unlikeliest places. But for now, walk slowly. Let the flavor linger. And remember, someone once sang to snow just for you. You travel west now, through dry valleys and along the stony spines of imperial roads, out of Persia and into lands where olive trees lean lazily in the sun and philosophers argue louder than priests. Greece. You wander into a courtyard shaded with grapevines. A group of men recline on woven mats, sipping something pale and cold from small ceramic cups. It's not wine. It's snow honey water, imported ice melted into spring water, lightly sweetened and perfumed with time. One man offers you a cup and a wink. It chills the mind and calms the belly, he says, though his flushed cheeks suggest he's had at least 4. You drink, and it's like sipping a melted cloud with a breath of herbs. Refreshing, curious, and definitely inspired by the East. Historians still argue whether the Greeks learned frozen dessert techniques directly from Persian traders, or if they developed them independently using local snow. What's certain is that Greek texts from as early as the 5th century BC mention mixing snow with honey, citrus, and wine for medicinal and celebratory purposes. And let's be honest, anything the Greeks called medicinal was probably dessert in disguise. You duck into a symposium, a kind of intellectual dinner party where ideas are traded like gossip. Someone is presenting a new mixture: pounded ice, fig syrup, and a few drops of vinegar. The reaction is mixed. One man frowns. 2 bracing. Another nods. Perfect for hangovers. The cook beams. Undeterred. In the corner, a physician from Kos claims that snow chilled with myrtle smoke can ease fevers and restore balance to one's humors. No one corrects him, because he has impressive eyebrows and smells faintly of camphor. You're starting to notice a pattern. Cold equals cure. Here's a fringe detail for your notebook. In some mountain villages, Greek children were given snowballs, dipped in pomegranate molasses and rolled in herbs. Not for fun, mind you, but to train the body against extremes. That's one way to sell dessert, as parenting. You pass a food stall near the harbor where a grizzled vendor crushes ice with a mallet, then spoons it into folded grape leaves with fermented honey paste. He says it was a Thracian recipe, but he added a bit of his own invention, black pepper. It's bizarre. It's thrilling. It's halfway between a treat and a dare. You eat it anyway. And then there's Athens. In the richer homes of philosophers and statesmen, imported snow was stored in deep stone cisterns, lined with straw, sealed with wax. Not yakshuls, but primitive cooling cellars nonetheless. Guests were offered chilled fruit, frozen diluted wine, and tiny cakes served with icy nectar. Aristotle himself reportedly wrote about snow as a preservative and a tool for distillation. He noted how cold clarified liquids, whether or not he ever spooned himself a frosty peach slush, is up for debate, but you like to imagine it. Quirkier still, there's a temple in Boeotia where the priestess reportedly only drank snow-cooled spring water as part of a monthly ritual. She believed it preserved purity. Whether that's true or just very niche branding is anyone's guess. By now, your feet are sore from walking marble steps, and your lips are sticky with half a dozen experiments in chilled delight. But the flavors linger: fig, honey, pepper time. And each one tells you something different about this culture. Something quiet and sweet beneath all the shouting. You rest by a fountain as evening settles. Somewhere, a lyre begins to play. You hear laughter and the clink of cups. Someone nearby says, "Let's chill the wine." And someone else says, "Let's chill everything." The Greeks didn't build domes or store snow in desert pits, but they understood ice. They used it to soothe the sick, delight the curious, and remind themselves that even in the hottest parts of summer, a little chill could be a divine gift. Tomorrow? Rome. And trust me, if anyone could turn frozen dessert into a political performance, it's the Romans. You arrive in Rome not with a grand fanfare, but with dusty sandals, a parched throat, and the hope, however distant, that someone nearby is selling a cup of something cold. Because if there's one thing the Romans loved more than conquest, it was spectacle and cold desserts. Oh, they were perfect for both. You make your way through crowded streets, past open-air baths, shouting vendors, toga-clad senators debating taxes, and children chasing one another with sticks. Rome is noisy, proud, always moving. But follow the trail of laughter and citrus scent, and you'll find what you're looking for. There, in the shadow of a marble villa, is a small stand manned by a boy with one eye on his ice and the other on a lazy street cat. On his wooden table, a slab of snow packed in clay, a jar of golden syrup, and a few small ceramic bowls. His specialty? Nix cum mel, snow with honey. You sit grateful. He doesn't speak. He just grates a handful of snow into a cup, drizzles syrup on top, and hands it to you with a nod. The first taste is familiar, sweet, cold, slightly gritty. But somehow, this feels performative. Even at the smallest stalls, there's flair. A garnish of basil, a wedge of lemon, a flake of crushed violet. This is Rome. Even snacks know how to pose. Historians still argue whether Roman frozen desserts were direct descendants of Persian faluda or a parallel development. What's clear is that by the 1st century BCE, the upper class in Rome had embraced snow-based treats. They imported snow from the Apennines and Alps, stored it in deep pits, some lined with straw and sawdust, and served it at feasts like an edible miracle. But wait, there's more. The Emperor Nero himself was famously obsessed with cold confections. One of his favorite indulgences? Snow fetched from the mountains by relay runners, stored in underground chambers, then mixed with fruit pulp, honey, and flour syrups. Think of it as the world's most exhausting sorbet. Some say he even punished couriers who delivered melting snow. Others claim he never touched it, too sensitive to cold teeth. Historians still debate how much of this is true and how much is just poetic scandal. But it fits the mythos of Nero, dramatic, indulgent, and just a little ridiculous. You walk deeper into the city, into one of the Domus kitchens near Palatine Hill. A feast is being prepared. And yes, Nix manicatus, the Roman version of flavored snow, is on the menu. The process? Delightfully extra. First, snow is scooped into a bronze bowl, chilled with salt water. Then, fruit purees, plum, apricot, grape, are stirred in slowly, with someone whispering a prayer to Jupiter for smoothness. Because naturally, dessert is a divine affair. Some Romans even added a splash of vinegar or wine to cut the sweetness. One recipe calls for rose petal reduction, powdered almond, and a dash of myrrh. Not for everyone, but certainly Roman. Here's a quirky fact. During Saturnalia, some homes would serve icy desserts in miniature amphories shaped like gods. You could spoon sweet snow from the belly of Bacchus himself. Disturbing? Slightly. Memorable? Definitely. You pass through a small apothecary tucked behind a bathhouse. A sign outside reads, Frigus pro anima, cold for the soul. Inside, a physician prepares chilled herbal syrups, sage, licorice root, lavender. Mixed with shaved ice, these were thought to cure fevers, improve digestion, and ease the nerves of over-anxious senators. Sounds like everyone could have used a double portion. Even children's school lunches sometimes featured a scoop of frozen milk flavored with honey and date paste. One preserved clay tablet shows a teacher complaining that half my students' feigned stomach aches for snow honey. Lazy little stoics. And perhaps the oddest Roman dessert you'll never try? A rumored delicacy made from snow, fish paste, and pickled plum. Allegedly good for melancholy. More likely, good for keeping people from stealing your dessert. By now, you've tasted 4 different versions of Roman ice treats, all delicious in their own right, and all clearly part of a culture that didn't just like spectacle. They lived for it. You sit on the steps of a temple, watching the sun dip low behind columns. The air is still hot, but your breath smells faintly of lemon and mint. Across the plaza, someone pours snow into a goblet, adds a splash of saffron syrup, and hands it to a woman in violet robes. She laughs, loud and bright. It echoes like music, and you realize, for the Romans, cold wasn't just a relief. It was theater, indulgence, prestige. Tomorrow, you'll head east again to discover how frozen treats crossed even more surprising cultural borders. But for now, linger in the glow of the Roman evening. A bowl of history melting slowly in your lap. You leave the echoes of Roman laughter behind and turn your feet eastward once more, through dusty roads, across narrow bridges, past cities whose names twist on your tongue like forgotten songs. The destination? India, or rather, the India of the early dynasties, Maurya, Gupta, and the countless smaller kingdoms that stitched together an ancient, fragrant quilt of spice and stone. And here, in the shade of tamarind trees and the sprawl of city temples, frozen desserts find new voices. You arrive in Pataliputra, the throbbing capital of the Mauryan Empire. The city sings with markets and monks, with the clang of bronze bells and the whisper of silk robes. And in a quiet courtyard behind a merchant's house, you find a wide, shallow marble basin packed with chipped ice. At its center, a bronze pot, gently spinning, suspended by cords over salted slush. The process seems familiar. The results? Less so. A young woman scoops a pale mixture from the pot and offers it to you in a pressed leaf bowl. You taste. It's milk-based, but denser than anything from Persia or Rome. There's cardamom, saffron, and a subtle crunch of pistachio. Cold, sweet, dreamy. She smiles. Kulfi, she says, for summer weddings. Historians still debate whether ancient India had true frozen desserts, or whether these early forms of kulfi were more like thickened, chilled creams. Some point to Ayurvedic texts that describe cooling tonics of rose milk and crushed ice. Others argue that kulfi, in its modern frozen form, likely emerged centuries later during the Mughal period. But something was happening here, something cold and creamy. You move through a street lined with spice sellers and apothecaries, each one boasting of ingredients to cool the body: fennel seeds, vetiver root, rose petals soaked in water. And always, the phrase to balance the heat. A vendor offers you a sample of iced tamarind drink, sharp and electric on the tongue. Keeps your liver from boiling, he says matter-of-factly. In another corner of the city, a wealthy home prepares for a feast. You're ushered into the kitchen, a fragrant cavern of clay ovens, boiling pans, and women stirring milk in wide, shallow dishes for hours until it thickens to a creamy sludge. It's then poured into tiny conical molds and packed into a clay jar filled with crushed ice and salt. A cook shows you how they plug each mold with cloth soaked in saffron milk. For the smell, she says, and to keep spirits from getting inside. You nod. Always best to cover your bases when dealing with frozen milk. And then there's something stranger, snow from the Himalayas. Rare, expensive, sometimes used in court rituals or as offerings to local deities. One record, possibly apocryphal, speaks of a Gupta prince who imported snow wrapped in layers of bark, straw, and silk, carried on the backs of runners over hundreds of miles. It arrived mostly melted. He wept anyway. Another story? In the southern kingdoms of the Deccan, a seasonal treat known as paladai, a chilled rice and milk dish flavored with jaggery and nutmeg, was sometimes buried overnight with palm leaves to achieve a semi-frozen state. Thicker than cream, colder than rain, one wandering poet described it. And while India had no yakshals, they did have ingenuity. In the highlands, some temples maintained ice caves, natural formations or manually dug pits used to store snow or cold water. Not for dessert, per se, but for rituals and healing. Still, you know how these things go. Somewhere along the line, someone must have tasted it. One fringe theory among food historians suggests that frozen sweets in India may have first developed as medicines. There's an Ayurvedic principle that increases so cooling the body with something cold wasn't just comfort, it was therapy. A frozen treat wasn't indulgence. It was wellness. You return to the courtyard as the sun dips low and oil lamps flicker to life. The girl with the kulfi offers you another taste, this one with mango pulp folded in. She whispers that her grandmother used to eat it only on full moons, claiming it calmed her dreams. You smile. That tracks. As the city winds down and prayers rise from rooftop shrines, you feel a strange peace settle around you. The kind of quiet that comes from cold milk, warm cardamom, and the knowledge that halfway across the world, people were freezing sweets not for fame or pageantry, but because it made them feel better. Next, we cross the Himalayas, to China, to bamboo buckets of ice, snow-filled wells, and emperors who dreamed of peaches served on frozen jade. But for now, let the saffron linger. Let the sweetness slow your pulse. Now, you cross the great roof of the world. The Himalayas stretch before you like frozen dragons asleep under the sky, their peaks wrapped in silence, their valleys pulsing with wind. You descend slowly into a land of lacquered wood and bamboo groves, of ink-brush scrolls and whispered poetry. Welcome to ancient China, where frozen desserts evolved not as luxuries, but as philosophies in edible form. You step into the walled garden of a Tang Dynasty scholar's home. The courtyard smells faintly of plum blossoms and pine resin. A servant passes you a shallow porcelain bowl. Inside, snow. Just snow, lightly dusted with powdered green tea and a single preserved plum. It's subtle, almost austere. And it's perfect, because here, in the gardens and tea houses of Chang'an and Luoyang, dessert wasn't a loud affair. It was a gesture, a balance of yin and yang, of cool and warm, sweet and bitter. Cold treats were rare, seasonal, and treated almost like medicine for the soul. Historians still argue how far back Chinese frozen desserts really go. Some trace their origins to the Zhou dynasty, when snow was collected and stored in underground wells, shueku, lined with packed earth and straw. Others credit the Han emperors, who built massive ice houses outside the palace walls and taxed communities for snow delivery. Either way, by the time of the Tang, cold things had become both practical and poetic. You pass a row of servants tending to a bamboo bucket packed with salted ice. At its center, a bronze bowl spins gently, the handle turned by a sleepy-eyed boy with arms like noodles. Inside, milk, ginger, and rock sugar. Yes, China had its own version of ice cream. No dairy-heavy kulfi or syrupy Persian sharbat here. This was lighter, often plant-based. Almond milk, soybean paste, rice starch blended with fruits like lychee, longan, and jujube. Sometimes served frozen, sometimes chilled and poured over crushed ice. One scholar you meet explains that frozen desserts balance the fire in the blood. Another says they cool the heart before poetry. Both sound right. You sit in a pavilion beside a koi pond. A small plate is placed before you. It holds a delicate square of frozen persimmon jelly, served on a chilled stone. The first bite is floral, faintly bitter, and so cold it almost evaporates. You exhale slowly. Somewhere, a bamboo flute begins to play. But this isn't just about scholars sipping poetry. There are stories from the streets, too. In busy markets during midsummer, vendors sold bing shui, shaved ice soaked with cane syrup, or rose water, or plum brine. Children clutched chip bowls, eyes wide. Some wealthier homes even kept insulated boxes packed with winter snow, traded at high price for silk or salt. A quirky detail. The Tang Empress Wu Zetian reportedly ordered a cool chamber built in her garden, where she could sample frozen lotus pudding under a ceiling of mirrored bronze. Whether that's true or not, historians still don't agree. But someone carved it into a poem, and isn't that even better? Meanwhile, in the countryside, farmers used mountain caves to store blocks of ice collected in deep winter. These were marked with red string charms to ward off decay or mischief, depending on who you asked. Ice was sacred and slippery, and the methods? Ingenious. Some recipes describe freezing techniques using stone jars buried in shallow pits filled with salt water and shaded with lotus leaves. Others mention wrapping fruit in snow-lined cloth, then burying it under bamboo mats overnight. The goal wasn't just cold, it was balance. A dessert couldn't just numb the tongue. It had to soothe the wind in the chest, as one physician put it. And what about mythical origins? Well, there's the tale of the kitchen god's wife, who once served the Jade Emperor a bowl of frost flower water so perfect it turned to silk in his mouth. He wept. She was rewarded with an eternal peach tree and a snow-white fox. You can't argue with storytelling like that. As the sky turns indigo and fireflies blink into being, you sip a final cup of iced chrysanthemum tea, flavored with honey and a single drop of vinegar, just enough to sharpen the sweetness. Your host nods approvingly. To remember the cold in summer is the mark of a wise man, he says. You smile. You're not sure if you're wiser, but you are full and calm and cool. Next, we'll descend into the medieval era, where trade routes flicker and war looms. But ice still finds its way to kings and commoners alike. But for now, lean back, let the tea work, and listen to the frogs begin their chorus in the moonlit pond. You drift now into the Middle Ages, a time of silk and swords, forgotten cities, and flickering candles, where ice continued its quiet journey across continents like a whisper passed hand to hand, where science and sugar met in sun-drenched gardens and desert palaces. You begin in Baghdad. The city pulses with light and thought, a place where scholars debate algebra over honey cakes, and astronomers trace planets between sips of jasmine tea. But in the kitchens of the Abbasid caliphs, something far more delightful is being perfected, the sharbat. You watch as a cook pours syrup, dark with dates and scented with rose, into a bowl of crushed snow brought down from the Zagros Mountains. The result is both drink and dessert. Cold, sweet, gently floral, with a sour undercurrent from barberries steeped the night before. It's dizzying and entirely medieval. Historians still argue whether sharbat was a direct continuation of Persian ice traditions or a new invention born of Arab ingenuity. Some trace it to the palaces of Samarra. Others insist its roots lie in Damascus or even Moorish Spain. What's clear is that by the 9th century, flavored ice was flourishing, and not just in elite households. You follow a narrow alley behind a madrasa where children trade coins for cups of frozen syrup water with mint and melon. One vendor pours his from a copper urn packed with chilled stones. He says it keeps the summer from winning. You believe him. Further west, in Al-Andalus, Moorish Spain, you find citrus groves and irrigation canals so precise they whisper geometry. Here, chefs began blending local oranges and figs into frozen creams, stored in shaded cellars, and served at evening feasts. One sultan supposedly demanded a different flavor of icy dessert for each night of Ramadan. Almond, quince, lavender, ginger, fennel. 40 days, 40 dreams. In Cairo, the Fatimids built massive ice storage pits outside the city. Snow was imported from the Sinai, wrapped in palm mats, and stored underground. Cold drinks became more than just treats, they were status. Guests were ranked by how many types of frozen fruit syrups they were offered. A quirky fact? Some medieval texts mention the idea of a cold sweet, eaten before the meal, to open the stomach's eye. It was thought to prepare the body for richer foods. So yes, ice is appetizer, very avant-garde. And then there's Sicily. You arrive on the island under a blazing sun, but step into the cool stone walls of a Norman Arab villa, where cooks are hard at work on something curious, sorbetto. Derived from charbat, this early Italian frozen treat uses snow from Mount Etna, lemon juice, and a touch of orange blossom. Sweet, sharp, and utterly new. You sip slowly. This is the birth of something modern, something recognizably on the road to gelato. Meanwhile, in Northern Europe, cold treats remain rare. There's no Persian yakshal or Arab snow trade. But still, stories trickle north of sweet ices eaten by Moorish lords, of orange-scented snow and Venetian feasts. Occasionally, wealthy nobles in France or England attempt their own versions using snow and wine or milk curd. The results are mixed. Here's a peculiar one. In 13th century England, a feast for a visiting ambassador allegedly featured a pudding of snow and almond, served in a chilled silver dish lined with moss. Whether it was any good is unclear, but it looked impressive, which, as always, was the point. Back in the Islamic world, poets waxed romantic about frozen pomegranate drinks and sorrows melted in ice and sugar. Doctors prescribed chilled syrups for liver heat, and lovers sent flavored ices as tokens in place of flowers. There's even a recipe for snow mixed with musk and moonlight, whatever that means. You suspect a mistranslation, or maybe just poetry doing what it does. The Crusaders, returning to Europe, brought back many things, some terrible, some beautiful. Among the beautiful, a taste for sherbet. Slowly, in Italian courts and Mediterranean ports, the idea of frozen dessert began to take root. Just a spoonful here, a rumor there. And so, as the medieval world turns slowly, like a pot of syrup over a winter flame, cold desserts continue their march. Quiet, luxurious, inevitable. You stand now beneath the arch of a courtyard lantern. The night is thick with date trees and jasmine. A cup of charbat rests in your hand. Somewhere, a musician plucks a single-string lute. And somewhere else, a cook grates ice under the stars. One more leg of the journey awaits. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment. Ice houses turn to ice boxes, and the great age of frozen dessert takes its final, modern shape. But for now, finish your drink. Let the silence swell. Now the world quickens. You leave behind the shadowed courtyards of the medieval East and step into the bright, powdered light of the European Renaissance. Marble halls, velvet drapes, men with impossibly large collars, and women who faint at both poetry and improperly tempered custard. The Age of Enlightenment is blooming, and with it, a sweet revolution in ice. You're in Florence first. The Medicis are hosting a banquet so decadent, even the grapes are wearing ribbons. Amid trays of roasted quail and candied violets sits something strange and glistening, a chilled custard scented with bergamot and served on a block of marble. The diners swoon. This is gelato's earliest form, richer than charbat, creamier than kulfi, but still flavored with restraint. A culinary bridge between science and indulgence. Historians still argue over who invented gelato. Was it Bernardo Buonallini, the Florentine architect and part-time dessert genius who combined milk, sugar, egg yolk, and a little magic? Or was it street vendors in Sicily adapting Arab sorbetto for a growing bourgeoisie? The truth, as always, melts between the cracks. By the 17th century, European royalty was obsessed with all things cold. France especially. Louis XIV had an ice house the size of a chapel. His cousin, the Duke of Orleans, allegedly had a different frozen dessert for each mistress. One day, blood orange in thyme. The next, clove, lemon, and a whisper of regret. You visit one of these grand chateaux and find a copper bowl of fromage glacé, not cheese, but a soft, frozen cream flavored with cinnamon and molded to resemble a wedge of brie. A joke? A statement? A very fancy prank? Probably all three. And now, the strangest development yet, the arrival of ice cream as a social equalizer. You walk the cobbled streets of Enlightenment London, where a tiny shop displays a sign reading, "Ices and creams for ladies and gentlemen of taste." Inside, amid the scent of vanilla and street smoke, sits a woman stirring cream into an iron pail. Surrounded by shaved ice and salt, she's making early English ice cream, thicker than sorbet, often flavored with fruit, wine, or even brown bread. Yes, bread ice cream. Someone had to try it. And just like that, frozen desserts escape the palace walls. A vendor in Paris sells ices from a handcart lined with wool. A German botanist writes a treatise on snow as a preservative. In colonial America, George Washington allegedly spent $200 on ice cream in a single summer. Whether it was love or gluttony, we'll never know. A quirky footnote? In 18th century Naples, a monk invented a frozen lemon dessert meant to replicate the experience of walking through a citrus orchard after rainfall. It became so popular that the recipe was smuggled to Vienna inside a hollowed-out Bible. Probably. You visit a town square in Bologna, where a cook hands you something new, a cone. A cone, not yet the crisp waffle of modernity, but a folded pastry shell designed to hold a scoop of crema fredda. It drips all over your fingers. You don't care. And as the Industrial Revolution dawns, the true flood begins. Ice becomes transportable. Machines churn cream faster than any monk's arm ever could. Isabuxas fil almas. And in Italy, France, America, frozen desserts evolve from luxury to lifestyle, from ritual to routine. But even now, in the age of mass production and mechanical chill, echoes of the old ways remain. Persian faluda still cools hot nights in Shiraz. Indian kulfi continues to grace wedding feasts. Chinese iced teas soothe summer throats. And somewhere in Rome, a vendor still grates snow in a syrup and calls it a gift from the gods. You stand now at the edge of modernity, a cone in your hand, 1,000 years of ice behind you. The sun is warm. Your fingers are sticky. And still, the dessert endures. The journey is almost over. But we won't end it with fanfare. We'll end it slowly, softly, with a gentle wind down the way snow melts. Quietly, beautifully, without demand. So close your eyes. Let the past dissolve like lemon ice on your tongue. The world quiets around you now. The clatter of ancient kitchens fades into silence. The scent of saffron, rose, and almond softens into memory. You lie back, somewhere between time and dream, in a courtyard you visited 100 times tonight, though it always looked a little different. Above you, the sky glows the same gentle color as frozen milk. Somewhere far off, a copper spoon is being set down, its work done. You remember the yakshuls in the desert, tall and still beneath the stars. The philosophers of Athens, sipping snow syrup as if it were wisdom. The Roman couriers sprinting through dust to deliver one spoonful of sweetness. The children in India, licking saffron kulfi off their fingers beneath a mango tree. The poets in China, crafting metaphors from frost and silence. The ice, it turns out, was never just about the dessert. It was about people, about longing, about comfort, a way to hold onto something fleeting, a way to feel cool, even when the world burned. And so, as you drift now, slowly, gently, through the last threads of this story, remember, every culture sought something soft in the heat. Every person, at some moment, wished for something sweet and cold and small. You did too. So rest easy now. Let your breathing slow. Let the air around you chill just slightly. You're full of quiet things, dates, jasmine, peaches, cardamom. The night holds you gently. The past was soft after all, and sleep is sweet.